Welcome to Dyscastia, a podcast for parents and teachers about the best way to support students living with learning difficulties. My name's Michael Shanahan, and I'd like to acknowledge that I'm casting to you today from the lands of the Kaurna people. This episode is about making safe spaces for neurodivergent learners. What does that mean? It means how do we get schools or any kind of learning situation we're in to be nice places for neurodivergent people? How do we make it so that they want to learn, they want to be there, and they're enthusiastic and they feel safe? And to help me with this, I've got a fantastic guest, Valli Jones. Valli, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Michael. So I'm a clinical psychologist. I work in private practice on the Gold Coast in Queensland, and I work mostly with neurodivergent young people, adolescents, young adults and their families. And so within that, I do see a lot of school students, and a big part of my role is sort of helping them manage and navigate the landscape, the social landscape of school and the academic landscape of school. And so, a big priority for me is supporting the adults who are looking after those kids to create safe spaces for them and really just create a space where kids feel seen and valued and understood. And with that comes that sense of safety.
Yes, and look, what you do, my experience of it is brilliant, which is why I wanted to speak to you. So earlier this year, I came across one of your courses, which I did. And it was fantastic because all the information that you gave made complete sense to me. And I loved the fact that you'd come up with a framework, a safe house framework. I even love the name, where students can feel safe. Now, the reason this really resonated for me is because a lot of the work that I do is with students that don't feel safe. Because I work in intervention, by the time they get to me, they often have quite a negative self-image. Students who go to see a tutor because they're not doing well at school are already feeling like, I'm not good at this. And unfortunately, lots of them kind of fall into a very kind of anxious state where things are just too difficult. School goes too fast for them. So many of them are slow processors. And I'm a slow processor myself. If I'm having a conversation, even as an adult, someone says something, I have to kind of think about it for a few seconds, kind of put the pieces together in my mind, make sense of it, and then I can start listening again. And in the meantime, the teacher might have said 5 more things that I've missed. So things go too fast. And a lot of the kids I work with are like that. Things are just going a bit too fast for them and they get a bit lost. They get anxious, and then they might be called on by a teacher to give an answer and they don't know, and they might get into trouble for not listening. Like, you can see how this becomes a cycle for students. And what I loved about your framework is that it gives us some tools and a way to think about the kind of behaviours we see that are kind of diagnostic rather than reactive. It gives us a chance to step out of the moment and maybe plan what to do in certain circumstances, plan ahead so we're not caught off guard as teachers or tutors. That's a long preamble, but that's kind of how I came across what you were doing, and I really loved it. And I wondered if we could talk through the thinking behind the Safe House framework, how you came to it, and maybe just talk us through the steps along the way and how we might be able to use it either as teachers or tutors or parents.
Right, yes. Well, so the Safe House framework is really a guide for thinking. So there's lots within each stage of it, but really if you just look at the high-level guide for thinking, we've got the foundations. So anytime you're building a house, you lay really solid foundations, and the foundations are our mindset as the adult. And so, it is a framework for neurodiversity affirming practice, and so the mindset is that neurodiversity affirming mindset. So the basic principles of the neurodiversity paradigm are, respect for and acceptance of diversity, all forms of diversity. Humans are an enormously diverse species. There's no one right way to be human. And
Yep.
that diverges quite starkly from our social conditioning, which is often, we're medical model diagnoses focused. We, children get a diagnosis, and then there's intervention, and the intervention
Yep.
is often, even the word intervention, I think, is alarmist. It's this word that sort of implies, hang on, we're on the wrong path. We've got to,
Emergency.
We're totally using that. But for parents, it's just awful to think, oh, God, I've got to, my child needs intervention. So the neurodiversity paradigm is about accepting that people come in all various forms, colour, shape, sizes, ways of thinking and seeing the world, and it's all okay. We just need to understand. We need to understand a child's brain, how they perceive the world, how they learn best, how they communicate and socialise, and just come at that from a really non-judgmental, non-pathologising sort of perspective. Which
is quite difficult, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Because that's a different way of thinking. And so this is step one, isn't it? But that is hard. That's something that takes a lot of work on behalf of the person trying to change their thinking.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so much of the biases so many of the biases that we carry are unconscious. We're not aware of them because we're just marinating in this culture of pathologizing any sort of difference. And so that is the work in certainly the program that I've put together is really walking people through that work really kindly and gently, because at the end of the day, no one, I always say we have to assume positive intent. This is a systemic issue. This is not a personal attack. This is not people making a conscious decision to be harmful. No. This is a systemic issue. Understanding that having a child be told or believe that they're somehow broken is very harmful. Having a child understand that their brain works differently and this is something that is going to help them is not. So it's it's just that little tweaking.
It is subtle. It is subtle, isn't it? So it's not a huge change. It's just about not thinking of this as broken or something that needs to be fixed. But I don't know, I just think this is a person. And this is what this person needs, and kind of breaking away from that diagnostic framework and looking at the person in front of you and go, okay, what do you need? How can I set this up for you? Rather than perhaps saying, how can I make you conform to what already exists? Would that be the difference, do you think, at this kind of first level?
Yes, absolutely. And understanding that we all have to do work to uncover our implicit biases. And so a lot of that is reflection. A lot of it's pausing and going, hang on, what assumptions am I making in this situation? And is there, anything in my language or my approach that is potentially going to be harmful for the young person in front of me? And can I change that? Which, as you say, it's really subtle. They're really, we're really just slightly modifying what we know and what we do so that we're not unintentionally creating a perception for a young person that there's something wrong with them.
And that's so important, isn't it? That they have that healthy perception of themselves. So your framework is written with autistic students in mind, isn't it? That's the basis of it.
Yes.
And I can see, so we're talking about, we were talking about dyslexia before. That's kind of invisible. You know what I mean? A student sitting in a class or with a tutor or whatever, it doesn't present as something difficult behaviourally necessarily. But it may be that neurodivergence presents itself, in a way that makes it difficult to deal with in a typical classroom. So say someone is, shouts all the time and it's difficult for them to keep quiet, or someone living with ADHD like me, when I was a kid, I couldn't stay in my seat. I was always getting up and walking around and doing stuff. And in a classroom, that's really disruptive. everyone else gets distracted, they get distracted, that would egg me on, it becomes difficult.
It
And
does.
so in those kind of situations where we're talking about those behaviours that might be problematic, how does this shift in perspective help us? Or, how do you go about thinking about that in a different way?
Well, I guess to bring it back to the framework, so the next stage of the framework, if we've laid the foundations and we're coming at it from an affirming mindset, the next stage of the framework is the floor plan, which is really understanding that child's unique profile of strengths, differences, and support needs. And so for an ADHDer or, a child with impulse control stuff going on, we know they need to move. We know that we're setting them up to fail. If we want them to sit down and listen for an hour, we are setting them up to fail. That's not going to happen. So understanding that, we would look at what sort of supports and accommodations can we put in proactively to prevent that fail from happening. And so it might be that we have flexible seating arrangements in the classroom, and we might have the opportunity for them to use fidgets and different, whether it's rocker stools, all those sorts of movement-based supports that are not going to interrupt the class, but that give them the opportunity to use movement to regulate. And if they can't do that, then having someone available to take them for a walk or to give them some sort of break at regular intervals throughout the class. And then recognising, so that's the floor plan. The next stage of the framework is the windows, and that's the lens through which we view that behaviour. And so if we are seeing a behaviour that's not what we're expecting, looking at it through, often primarily it's that sympathetic nervous system lens. So looking at it and going, is this behaviour suggestive of a child whose sympathetic nervous system is activated, so they're anxious or they're feeling threatened in some way? And for an autistic or an ADHD student, autistic in particular, there are so many different factors that can be activating that sympathetic nervous system that are invisible. We might have a child with a language impairment, and there's a lesson that's verbally delivered that's going on and on. And so they're getting more and more heightened, knowing that they're not quite catching everything that's being said, then they might be bored, or, a child with a slower cognitive processing and they're just not able to keep up. Or there might be some sensory aspect of the environment that's activating them. So the sympathetic nervous system can be activated by really benign things that are just a mismatch between the student.
What do you mean by sympathetic nervous system? What's that?
So the sympathetic nervous system is there's the autonomic nervous system is the overarching, so the umbrella, the nervous system that I'm talking about, and then there's a sympathetic branch and a parasympathetic branch. The parasympathetic branch is the rest and digest branch. So when we're in a parasympathetic state, we're calm, we're able to generally attend, our digestive system and all our restorative systems in our body are active. The opposite of that is the sympathetic nervous system, and so that's our fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flop nervous system. So that's the part of us that gets activated when there's a threat. And so, from an evolutionary perspective, it kept us safe. There's tiger, our heart rate increases, our breathing increases, we get going. So
what comes after the letter B?
Yeah, it could be that. It could be that.
Yeah,
it could be
that's right.
That there's, there's a particularly shouty teacher, and there's a student who's got auditory sensitivities, or there's just cognitive demands that exceed their capacity. There's countless things that can activate.
Countless things. Could be a smell. Could be a sound.
Yeah.
Could be what I had for breakfast that didn't agree with me.
It could be a
it's
thought.
It's huge, isn't it? Yeah, that's right. Could be a thought.
Yeah, it could be knowing this teacher cold calls. What if they're going to call, what if...
Yeah, what if I get asked a question?
Yeah. So it's really just being able to sort of take pause and ask yourself the question, what is going on for this student, and does their current behaviour align with those 5 sympathetic states that we know kids can go into. And some kids tend more towards the flight, that the kids will just get up and run.
Yep.
Or some kids tend more towards the fight. They're the kids who, might become aggressive. And they're the kids who tend to be the most misunderstood, because culturally we really frown on aggression.
Yes.
Understandably, because we need environments to be safe. The point is the environment's not safe for them, and that's why they're behaving that way. So rather than being the source of the risk, we actually have to look at, well, what risk are they responding to? What is prompting them to feel threatened? Fight, flight, freeze. They're the kids who just often go unnoticed because they'll look like they're complying, but they're not actually attending. They're not actually, they're sort of there in body only because they're in such a heightened state. The kids who fawn, that's that appease mode. So the kids who, really want to please and really want to be doing the right thing and really, want to be complying, but it's taking so much of their internal resources to do that there's not much left for learning.
Yes. And
then the flop sympathetic state is just a complete shutdown. And so those might be the kids who, sometimes they look very similar to the kids who are in a freeze state. Other times there will just be that complete shutdown, head down on desk, kind of unresponsive.
Yes.
Which, and I know often teachers sort of view that as behavioural as well, but it's really internally just a really heightened state of distress where they've just gone, shut down.
Yeah, it just shut down. I see students that just stare off into space and it's literally like they're frozen. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I literally have to kind of move and get into their eyesight, into their eye line and say, hey. And they're like, well, they shake their head, they come back. And it's usually because it's just got a bit too hard.
Yes.
This is too hard, or they've been working too hard for too long. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, mid-conversation, they'll just disappear. Yeah. Be staring off into space, and it's like, oh, what? Oh, yeah, what were we talking about again?
Yeah, no one's home. Or the other one is that the kids with that more PDA, it's called pathological demand avoidance, or pervasive drive for autonomy is a much more respectful way of viewing it, but that, often what is called defiance, just no, I won't, I'm taking control of this situation. I'm going to take control of this situation somehow. And that's sympathetic nervous system activation as well.
Yes.
And those kids are always humming along at a really heightened level, and it really doesn't take much at all for them to be tipped into something very unmanageable.
Because feeling in control feels safe. If you're in control, you're safe. If somebody else is in control, then you're at their mercy, and you don't really know what's going to happen next. And so, if that's your lifeline to go, okay, I've got to manipulate this so that I'm the one calling the shots because that's how I feel safe. That's where you see a lot of those behaviours, isn't it? That, no, I'm not going to do that. We're going to do it this way.
Yes.
Because I feel safer, not because it's a different activity, but because I was the one that decided that's what we were going to do next. And that's my comfort zone.
Yes. So the window is the lens through which we view behaviour. The door is, the walls. I forgot the walls. So the walls are all the supportive people. So that would be the parents, teachers, any allied health professionals, anyone who's involved in sort of creating a collective understanding and support plan for a child. The window is the lens through which we view behaviour. The door is the way we go about connecting with the young person. And so the priority is achieving relational safety, so a connection that's free from judgment, criticism or rejection. The roof is the protective people and systems, so that would be all the people who make up the walls, because we're all advocating for kids every time we learn, share something about them, provide some sort of advice for other people on the team around how best to support them. So they're the sort of closest contacts, closest protective people, and then it's legislation and those protective systems that are in place. And then the last stage is the landscape. And so that's the broader community and the community-wide level of understanding of different needs. So it might be autism or dyslexia or ADHD or what have you. And then, so as you mentioned, that creating a really safe space is what comes from having all of those stages in place.
Yep.
And then in a classroom setting, just from my perspective, to make it realistic for teachers, those universal design principles of just making the space as universally accessible as possible before putting those individual adjustments in place. And again, I'm not a teacher, I'm a psychologist, so I'm not assuming to know best, but just looking at it from my perspective, I think, I can't see how else this would work if you've got 25 young people in the classroom that potentially all have different needs. You kind of got to look at it universally and just remove the barriers systematically ahead of time, and then see what other adjustments and modifications and accommodations are needed for the students for whom those universal adjustments weren't enough.
Yeah. I really love it's complex, isn't it? But it's complex because it is complex.
Yeah.
And you can't kind of artificially say, well, it's just this one thing that we need to change. I love the fact that the framework brings everyone together that has an impact on the student or the child, all the people that would have influence, even those that might be administrators, so that there's an alignment there and a structure, and the framework. I really like that because, for example, thinking from my perspective, just as a tutor, I see a student for an hour a week and I don't really know what happens to them outside of that. I get little glimpses of it, but I don't really know what it's like at school for them unless they happen to tell me. And so you're quite isolated, aren't you?
Oh, yes.
And then the teacher doesn't really know what I'm doing in my tutoring. And often the parent isn't aware of what I'm doing in the tutoring or perhaps what's happening at school. So then you've got the whole home life for the student. That's a separate thing as well. And you could imagine, if you look at that from the student's perspective, someone that's struggling may be getting very mixed messages from a whole bunch of different places that are not necessarily lined up, which could itself cause kind of anxiety and confusion.
Absolutely.
I really like the idea of everyone kind of collaborating and getting together to agree that this is going to be our approach. Is that what you mean by having the walls and the roof and everyone working together?
Yeah, it's a framework for collaboration ultimately, because there is no way that we can really adequately support I created it with autistic students in mind, but it applies to any form of neurodivergence. We cannot support them well without collaborating. No one person has all the answers. It's, particularly with autistic students, it can be really complex, and most of the autistic experience is internal, and everybody has their area of expertise. As a student, as a tutor, you understand a student's learning and what they need in that environment. As a psychologist, I understand another aspect. The OT will understand another element. The speechy will have another. Will have different information to contribute. The teacher will have different information. Everybody's got so much valuable information that when it's all brought together, you've got a really clear picture of how to support a young person. But if everyone's operating in silos, everybody's just kind of doing the best they can, and we're all burning out as well. That's the other issue, isn't it? That everybody's really tired, and our sense of efficacy is compromised. The student's not getting the best, or the child's not getting the best support. Parents know their child better than anyone. They often don't feel like they are heard. They don't feel like they have a seat at the table in terms of what happens for their child, and I think that's so important for them to feel that. And so the Safe House framework is it's shared language, shared methodology. It's complex, but it simplifies something very complex to a point that it's manageable.
Yeah. And you get a picture of what's happening.
Yeah. Yes.
So let's say I'm a parent listening to this, and, you know, I think it's fair to say that there would be quite a number that are listening and saying, this all sounds familiar. You know, I've got an individual learning plan, but the school doesn't seem to be following it. The tutor's telling me this, the school's telling me that. I'm not sure what's the right thing. I've got a psychologist who's saying this, and none of us, you know, who are supporting the student are really talking to each other. I mean, it happens sometimes, but it's not often that I would have much to do with the teacher of a student. So in your framework, how does it work? Who's the central person that kind of drives it and builds the framework, and how do you bring those people together?
So my ideal scenario is, well, there's no ideal person to sort of instigate it. It can be anyone on the team. The ideal scenario would be for people to meet, everybody on the team to come together every 6 months and just work through so I do have a support plan template that, again, it's just about making it easy for people. Doesn't have to be prescriptive. You don't have to use that, but it's a support plan template that people contribute where they feel like they have relevant information. Yep. And so the purpose of meeting every 6 months would be to keep it up to date, because, I mean, the beauty is that kids change so quickly. They're changing all the time. And so having regular meetings make sure that we're meeting the child where they're at in their current stage of development. But failing that, if meeting every 6 months isn't possible, the support plan template is a fillable PDF that can be emailed around to each team member, and you just contribute what you see, know, what will be helpful, whatever recommendations you can make from your professional, that's within your scope. And then it's all just compiled in one document, and it's written from the child's perspective. And that's really intentional, because it is so much more humanising for it to be written from the child's perspective than it to be a whole lot of professionals or experts or, people who know better kind of putting their directives in place.
Yes.
So it's that subtle shift of saying, Billy has sensory processing differences, to going, I experience sound more strongly than others. That means I might get triggered by the school bell, or the, school assemblies are really hard for me, or what have you. And so it just shifts the perspective of the person reading it.
Yes.
So they're understanding the lived experience of the child rather than thinking about it at that cognitive level, and not necessarily connecting with what it means for the child. Because I think that's, my observation of some IEPs is that's kind of where it goes wrong. You read it and you don't necessarily see a child in there. You see a list of, often copy and paste kind of high-level instructions, but not understanding what that means for that child. And having it written that way also helps if it's the teacher or the parent or whoever it is, when there is a behaviour that occurs and they're looking at it through that lens of what is going on for this child. I can see the behaviour is the tip of the iceberg. What's under the water? What's really happening here? That support plan that's written from the child's perspective makes it much easier to connect those dots than something that's a little bit more clinical in nature.
Yes. It sounds a little bit daunting.
Yeah.
Like, this sounds like, because when you were saying, the ILP is often, individual learning plan is often kind of copied and pasted, I think that's because we're so time poor. And, sometimes a class will have almost every student with an individual learning plan. And as a teacher, the whole, even just the red tape, I mean, not that I'm a teacher, but, I understand even just kind of the bureaucracy and red tape around, say, doing a one plan or, having an individual learning plan for a student is so time consuming that it's almost like you can't do it. You know what I mean? It's almost like you have to do the copy and paste. That we're not doing that out of because we don't care. We're doing it because we don't have time to do anything else.
Well, and also because it shouldn't all be on the teacher's shoulders. That's where the collaboration comes in, is get other people on the team. I think, most parents would be very happy to sit there and write what they know and understand. And if there are allied health on the team, that's our job.
Yep.
Ask us, it's I love hearing from teachers saying, this is going on. What do you suggest? It's beautiful, because it means that they're looking for something. But and again, I'm sure this comes back to the time constraints that are the insane time constraints that are on teachers. I'm going through a pilot program now of the Safe House Schools program. I've got a school in the pilot phase, and it blows my mind the time constraints that are on teachers and leadership teams. So I get it, and I'm really trying to make it as easy as possible, but lean on us, because that's what we're here for. And that's where I think that fillable PDF that you just send out, if you don't have time to meet, just send it out, and it's directive in terms of what is meant to go in there. It shouldn't be on teachers. Ultimately, if you have to compile it all into a different document, or structure it differently for the education system, that's another thing. But it just should not be on teachers to have to come up with an individual learning plan independently.
Yeah,
not realistic. It's not fair.
Yeah, it's not fair, and it's so time consuming, and there are so many other things to do. See, this is where I loved the idea of bringing a team together and the collaboration, because I'm in, an unusual position compared to a teacher, in that I'm one-on-one with a student. And sometimes for years, sometimes I see students every week for a number of years. And that's a very different relationship to seeing them in a class of 25, 30 other kids.
It would be.
And I'm like you. I'm like, I would love to collaborate. I'd love to have a connection to know what's happening for them at school. Is there something I can work on that's going to help support the teacher and what they're doing? And vice versa. Sometimes I have like a breakthrough of understanding with a student where I go, that's been the issue all along. All I had to do was this, and it made all the difference. I'd love to be able to then share that and say to the teacher or whoever, or the parent or whoever it is, to say, hey, look, you might already know this, but I've discovered that, when I wear a hat, things go sideways, or any kind of little thing like that. I've discovered that just counting 30 seconds to myself after I ask a question for students that, have slow processing, even though that feels like an eternity, makes a monumental difference to how well the session goes, just to give them that thinking space to process what we've just done and move on or answer a question. I love the idea of that collaboration. I love the idea that I could learn from a teacher's insights, who spend all day with the kid, but I only get to see them for an hour a week. So that's one of the things that I loved about it. And, I mentioned before how much work it is for teachers, and said, this sounds like a lot of work, but actually it's sharing the load, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's all about sharing the load, because it's, I feel for teachers who don't feel that they can, or I'm sure a lot of students don't have supports to reach out to, but there is also just such restrictions around teachers' time, and I don't think teachers feel that they have the support of allied health or tutors, or even parents. A lot of the time, I don't think they, there's not necessarily a collaborative spirit between families and schools. It often becomes a little bit adversarial, and I don't think it's anyone's fault. I think it's the system doesn't allow for this. The system in itself is certainly pro collaboration, but there's not a framework and a system to support that. A framework and system in place. And that was sort of where I thought, maybe the Safe House framework, that's the framework. And then we get some systems, which at this stage, there's a fillable PDF. But I there's certainly going to be a tech-based option that can be updated. It's really just around confidentiality and privacy and, data security. That's the thing I'm trying to work out how to get around.
Yep.
Education systems all have their own requirements, but there's just absolutely got to be a collective mind approach. And that co-design, I think certainly from a neurodiversity paradigm stance, that is the co-design. That is where education brings all of the amazing things that education has to offer, and then the rest of the team help co-design a way for that education delivery to suit the needs of the student, that particular student. So,
would it be conceivable that a parent could do your training in the framework and then coordinate with allied health, school, tutor if they have one, and be like the central person?
Yeah.
So that, as you say, it stops that kind of adversarial relationship. It becomes a collaboration. The teacher perhaps, doesn't feel so pressured because it actually might be a little bit of a relief that here we've got a framework and I don't have to do all the heavy lifting.
Yes.
Do you imagine that it could work like that?
Oh yeah, the parent program is set up to facilitate that, absolutely. And there's really specific guidance for parents as well on how to advocate in cases where you might not have a teacher or a school system that's receptive yet, how to do that in a way that's respectful and positive and relationship building, as opposed to, I think a lot of parents feel disempowered and confused, and they don't necessarily understand how to go about it in a way that's going to be helpful. And so, that's where the adversarial sort of tone of the relationship between home and school comes into play, because they're frustrated. By the time they're communicating, often, teachers or the school might feel a little bit attacked. And I think, schools work incredibly hard. I don't know how. I just don't know. I remember the first day I dropped my oldest child off at school, and I just thought, this is miraculous. I'm going to drop them off here every morning. I'm going to pick them up in the afternoon, and they're going to be educated. How does this happen?
Easy as that.
There's a lot that happens, and it's, I think it's really important for parents to just know how to work with that system, understand that there are processes to go through.
Yeah.
And I think for some parents it also helps them to understand the role of their allied health team. I think, a lot of parents drop their kids off at therapy or, take them to therapy, but don't necessarily see where it all connects.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and that's where the affirming approach, the neurodiversity affirming approach, is different, because we're not, as therapists, we'll work on child-centred goals, whatever they may be, but a big part of our role is around helping other people understand and support the child, not change the child to fit in with the system, but help the people who are sort of delivering the system, so to speak, to support the child the way they need to be supported.
Yes. And so if I was a parent wanting to do your training and find out about it, what do I do? How do I find out about it? Is there a cost involved for the parent training?
So our website it's embracingneurodiversity.co, and there currently is a membership. I think it's $15 a month. I am more than happy for parents to join the program for free. They just need to email me. It was free up until probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, and the paywall is largely about security, having freely available things online with AI and what have you. I was given advice that it's better to have a paywall, so that's why we've got a $15 a month subscription. But there's just email. It is intended to be free for families that don't want costs to be a barrier.
Yes. And how long would it take? So if what would I expect as a parent if I enrolled in the training? What does it give me? How long might it take? And what would I have at the end of doing it?
So there's, I think, 4 hours or so of video in the parent program, and it works through the framework quite systematically. Each stage of the framework has a workbook section that essentially guides you through the application of the content in the video and helps you tailor that to the needs of your child. So there'll be, there's checklists and templates and those sorts of things that make the learning actionable. There is a monthly Connect and Learn. So that's online. It's an opportunity if you have questions or if you just want to connect with other parents in a similar situation, or, just if you have questions for me, I'm online for an hour every month. And, so you're just welcome to join that. And there is an online community. That's the other aspect of it. So that's an opportunity to ask questions whenever, 24/7. I'll just respond.
Yeah.
Or, I've got someone else who helps with that as well. So,
see, that just sounds great. And I think for many parents would be a bit of a lifeline to go, okay, I've got a framework. Because as a parent, you're just a bit lost to begin with. Like, it's so complex. And how do you navigate the system? How do you talk to teachers? How do you deal with frustration? And how do I, provide an environment for my child? It's a huge thing. And that's why I love the idea of having that framework. I love the idea of it being a house, so it's kind of more memorable to think these are the components that go together to make the safe house. Yeah. So the parents could do that. Parents listening now could go, if they can't afford the $15, they could send you an email, get in, do the training, and have a starting point and have a framework that they could work from. They could potentially talk to the teacher or tutor or allied health and start building that support network for their child.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's quite helpful for parents too. So the feedback I've had is that a lot of the time parents don't really understand what an OT does, say, or what the role of a psychologist is, or what do you see a paediatrician for versus a psychiatrist? What is, what is everyone supposed to do? I think a lot of parents, the child gets the diagnosis of autism and they get you need a speech, an OT, and a psychologist. And the number of parents I've had rock up to a first appointment and I say, oh, so what can I help you with? And they go, I don't know, we were told we needed a psychologist.
I was that parent.
Yeah, well, yes, it's alarmingly common. So
yeah, because how are you supposed to know? It's not your job. You're not involved in education. You've had no experience with disability or allied health. You're just really thrown in the deep end, don't you?
Yes, yeah, and I mean, from that perspective, thank gosh you do turn up to a psychologist and say, what can you help me with? Because the alternative is just not, and fumbling along. So, so that is a good outcome. But the course goes through the role of all the different people who might be on the team and the sort of reasons that you might go, maybe I do need to see someone like this. And so that's one of the checklists of going, does my child, struggle with these few things? Yeah, okay, so maybe an OT would be helpful. What about, does your child struggle with these things? Yeah, okay, so maybe a speechy would be helpful. So it just kind of helps parents navigate those early stages.
Sounds brilliant. And then if I'm a teacher listening to this,
so
what have you got for teachers?
So for individual teachers, individual teachers can also go to embracingneurodiversity.co and go to the courses for individuals, and there is a safe house framework for teachers, and that is the core framework, so everybody gets that same sort of basic understanding of autism. And that comes back to how do we work with these biases that we have. And a big part of the sort of evidence-based approach to working with biases is understanding the other, so-called, because as humans, we tend to be biased towards what's familiar and biased away from what's unfamiliar. And so for a lot of people who might not have any, autistic family members or haven't had a lot of interactions or education around autism, it's the unknown, and autistic people are the other. And so it's really just understanding autism. So you work through the framework, even if it's not all directly relevant to teachers, it is all directly relevant to understanding an autistic human, and that is really important for our bias.
Yes.
So that's the sort of core framework. And then for teachers, I really focus a lot on universal design, how to sort of take the parts of universal design that are most important for autistic students. And so we look at those 4 areas where they tend to be different. So social, their communication, behaviour, and their executive functioning. And it's what are the universal design strategies that are going to be most helpful for removing the barriers for students with differences in those areas. And then there's the social and emotional learning component. That's another workshop, just looking at how to set up a social and emotional learning, curriculum or different activities that create that classroom culture of safety, of psychological safety, of shared understanding. So that's the individual program. Schools can also join. There's the Safe House Schools program, which is that core training for teachers, and then there's a few other layers of it that look at school-wide psychological safety, because my observation is that that's not necessarily something that comes naturally in school environments. Psychological safety is, it's something that has to be built intentionally, and I don't think it has in the education system. It's very hierarchical. There's a lot of elements that potentially compromise psychological safety, and then looking at things like teacher well-being, because we absolutely need teachers to be looking after themselves, and for teachers to be, I think they're some of the most stretched people, there's
absolutely
so many demands. And so that has a component that really looks, so the school-wide psychological safety is a piece of that, but there's also looking at teacher wellbeing from that neuroscience perspective, and just what are those evidence-based, practical, things that can be done in a short amount of time for the most benefit for teachers in terms of their wellbeing.
Yeah. Wow. That sounds fantastic. And I keep saying this, but it's so nice to have that framework, because I think part of the issue is a whole bunch of people who all want the best thing but are not talking to each other. Or even if they are talking to each other, it's not in a structured way. And so you might get some wins and some improvements, but then you might end up going backwards because of a misunderstanding, or, you know what I mean? Unless you have some sort of structure and framework to it, it's very difficult to know whether you're succeeding, or, your child's getting home, and this is very common, whether it's autism or any kind of learning difficulty, they get home and they melt down because they've used every bit of energy they have during the day to cope. And they get home and they just go into meltdown. And, as a parent, I remember so many times talking to the school and saying, we've got some issues, and the school saying, I don't see an issue. They're fine. They're happy. I never see a problem at school. They seem to be getting on so beautifully. They've got friends. And then they come home and they absolutely fall into literally screaming mess that the school doesn't see, you see, and then it becomes an adversarial situation between the parent and the teacher, because you're not listening to me, so you can see straight away that having a framework where you could be getting together all on the same page, agreeing on strategies and how you're going to manage things, and having that regular check-in. Doesn't have to be a gigantic time imposition, does it?
No, it can be a Zoom meeting, 15 minutes. I think certainly once you've worked with kids for a while, they don't have to be long at all. There might be a little bit of setup in the early stages, but it becomes a case of just fine-tuning, making little adjustments over time that, account for a leap in development or a change in environment or what have you, or just some sort of, kids change. But it's all about being proactive. Every element of it is about being proactive and putting things in place that then make life easier, and it gets smoother and smoother as time goes on.
Easier for everybody.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And because we are in this phase, as a collective, this shift from the pathology paradigm to the neurodiversity paradigm, this is a new way of working. So there's an abundance of anecdotal evidence from the autistic community and the ADHD community, and there's certainly early, peer-reviewed studies. We're at the beginning of that sort of body of research being built, but these accommodations and adjustments, they just work. It just works.
Yes.
It's an approach that works. But it's, the challenge for me is being kind of going, okay, well, it's got to be as evidence-based as is humanly possible for people to, the education system, obviously everything has to have solid evidence behind it for it to be incorporated in education. And so, the Safe House framework, it's trauma-informed, it's, psychological safety is absolutely an evidence-based means of building engagement and innovation and productivity and, all of these things that are really important in education. So even if we're not necessarily able to provide, direct evidence that giving Billy this accommodation in this environment is going to be helpful, because we're just not there yet in terms of the science and the evidence.
Yep.
We absolutely know that if we create psychological safety, kids will be better able to engage and perform and innovate, think outside the box. And so the Safe House framework, it is a framework for creating psychological safety, because a key component of psychological safety is that acceptance of diversity and creating an environment where everybody is safe and welcome to be to be who they are. So, it's
because if you're not, you can't learn.
No,
because if all of your cognitive resources are taken up with just being able to sit still in the class, there's nothing left over to be processing what the teacher's saying or learning new information. All my energy is just on, don't get out of the chair, don't get out of the chair, don't get out of the chair. You know what I mean? It takes all your effort to kind of comply with the norm. There's not much left over. And so having some strategies around, well, how can we make the space safer for that student, or they're living with anxiety, what can we do? That's not going to be extra time or extra effort, but something we can build into our systems that allows for that student to have some, strategies for dealing with the anxiety, or, can we just shift their chair? Is it as simple, is there just some simple things we can do to make a difference? But we're not going to necessarily work out what those things are unless we are thinking about it, from the perspective you've been describing, and, having a team working on it and kind of diagnostically looking at that behaviour and saying, not so much how do we change the behaviour, but looking as to why is that behaviour happening and what circumstance or, situation, what can we change about the situation that addresses the behaviour, rather than just straight out saying, stop it.
Yes.
You're annoying me, stop it.
Yeah.
Because yes, the student will stop, but it hasn't addressed the reason. And, they might just then go underground and, there's just one, they now have less capacity to be learning.
Yeah. Or they just stop, they start refusing to come to school, or they behave, just act out in other ways. I think for the, teachers who are struggling with students but don't necessarily have a team to fall back on or other people to call on, I think we can trust kids more than we might realise as well if we have things, like flexible seating and different sensory supports available in the classroom, and fidgets that aren't distracting, and, we give kids a timeout card or what have you, where they can go, I just need 5 minutes. Kids, initially there will of course be the kids who just need to find the boundary and they'll push it.
Take advantage.
That's inevitable. That's going to happen.
Yeah.
But then kids regulate, I think if we give them that respect and that trust, and we talk to them really clearly about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and we understand that sitting still all day is really hard for some of you, and so we want to give you the opportunity to find something that works for you. So we've got some standing desks over here, and we've got these, whether it's bean bags or the rocker stools, or, we've got, you can lay down on the floor here if you want to lay on your stomach, or if that, we just are going to give you some time to work out what works for you. It's somewhat diagnostic as well, because eventually kids will find what works for them, and then you can support them in that.
Yep. Now, one of the strategies, that I use, and I'm interested in your thoughts on it, in regard to what we've been talking about. When I was at Teachers College, this is something I, remember ever since then. They taught me the idea of what ifs. Mm-hmm. And so while my head is clear and I'm not stressed, I'm not in the moment and being reactive, I come up with a list of all the possible terrible things that could happen. Like, what if a student does this? What if a student does that? So I would make a list of what ifs.
Yeah.
So what if the student gets up out of their chair and, grabs something off the table? Or what if the student swears or, whatever? And come up with, well, here's my strategy for it. And so when it happens, I'm not caught unaware, and I'm less likely to be in that reactive mode of just shouting or whatever, because I'm actually ready for this. I'm not caught by surprise. It's like, okay, they've got up out of their chair and here's what I'm going to do. If that doesn't work, here's what I'm going to do. So you kind of have the scenarios as much as you can planned out in your head. What do you think of that? Is that like, am I kind of living in the dark ages with that? Or is that a useful strategy?
I think it's a really good mindset strategy for teachers, isn't it? To even if you don't refer back to it or use the strategies that you've mapped out, it gives you that somewhat of a sense of control to have thought it all through and to understand that you do actually have options. And
see, maybe that's my control urge.
Well, I don't know. Do you use it? Are you quite prescriptive with the strategies, or do you look at the child in front of you and go, hang on, maybe, I know my theoretical strategy was going to be this, but I don't think that's going to work in this situation, so I'm going to try something else.
Yeah, that's right. It's definitely like that.
Yeah.
It's more so that I don't get caught on the hop. You know what I mean? Yeah. So when those unexpected things happen, I'm not just in a reactive state. I don't want to be in that reactive state where I potentially damage a relationship or fly off the handle or whatever. Not that I ever do, but, as a strategy, if we don't talk about extremes, even just, when you're building an environment, even if, say, as a parent, you think, well, they're going to be coming home from school and, they're going to be melting down, rather than reacting in that moment, you could kind of plan, okay, what are my 5 strategies that I could try when they're melting down? So your safe house framework and that collaboration reminded me of that, because now instead of just one person thinking about those what ifs, it's a team of people. So we could all be saying, well, what are we going to agree to do in this situation? And that gives the student a bit of consistency as well, doesn't it? If parents, teachers and everybody is kind of on the same page.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it also prevents that. I mean, it's so common for us as adults to be triggered by things that kids do, our own kids in particular, but, teachers in a classroom. And then when our sympathetic nervous system is activated, nervous systems talk on a pre-conscious level. We are tuned into each other as, just human beings. We sense what someone else's nervous system is doing. And again, that comes back to safety. If someone in our tribe collective is activated, they've seen the tiger but we haven't, their nervous system activates and our nervous system goes, well, there must be a problem even if we haven't seen the tiger.
Yes, exactly.
We're wired this way. So the more sort of equipped we feel as adults and the more options we've got up our sleeve, the less likely we are to get caught in that cycle of nervous system activation with kids where we're triggered, then they're triggered, then we're all everyone's losing it, and which is really common, especially the after school meltdowns. I know it's really hard for families. You got a child who gets in the car, and I mean, my daughter was the same. I've got a headache, I've got a tummy ache, I've got and all it was the day was too much. I'm done, and she would say, every day it would be a different thing, but ultimately what underlied all of it was all too hard. And that was really stressful for me as a parent initially until I worked out what was going on. And then, we just kind of worked out, okay, well, if I bring afternoon tea and I have that in the car and we have a big drink of water and we go to the park and we do a bit of a walk before we get home or go on the swing or, we do all our things and then we get home and we don't have the meltdown.
Yeah, that's right. You work it out.
Yeah.
And I love that, and to be able to share that with a tutor, with a teacher, with the whole support team around the student, I think would just make everybody's life easier. Mm-hmm. So I think this whole idea of collaboration within a framework, I don't know, I think it's just brilliant,
Thank you.
which is why I wanted to talk to you about it. Share some of my own psychological issues as well. It is hard though. It's so hard. As a tutor, I sit here by myself. I rarely get to speak to other adults. I just spend all day talking to kids.
Yeah, which is delightful in some ways, but I can see it very isolating in that you don't get the full story when you just talk to kids at all, do you?
Yeah, that's right.
You get a little snapshot, but there's so much more that you can know.
Yes. Okay, so all of the things you've mentioned I'll put in the show notes. So if people go to discastia.com and go to this episode, then I'll have links to your site and the programs and, all the notes from the show. Anything else you think we have not covered?
I want to ask you questions, but that's not what this is about, is it?
You can ask me questions.
How much information do you get about the students that you tutor? Do you have, you would get some information from parents, but do you focus on, a specific goal and just work with that, or what's your process?
Well, it depends on the student, of course.
Yeah.
But in general, I don't get much information. So I might get like a report from a psychologist, which might be the assessment. Mm-hmm. Which, is actually quite helpful to have a look at that and go, okay, you can get a picture of the student, whether it's dyslexia, dyscalculia or slow processing or, whatever it is. It's helpful, but only to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. I kind of do a lot of diagnostic stuff in the first few weeks. I suss them out in a very non-confrontational way. So I always think, I think relationships, because I think if our relationship's not good and they're not comfortable, then they're not going to learn anything. So a lot of it is about being positive rewards, blah, blah, blah. I get information from the parents, but that varies, not a whole lot. I very rarely get anything from school or from a teacher, which I think is a real missed opportunity.
Oh, yes, because you would be their greatest asset in terms of supporting a student's learning, because there's just not capacity to do that one-on-one in a school environment. There's no, or very rarely is there capacity for that to be provided at school, but to have that available is amazing.
Maybe it's just me, but no, there's not a lot of interaction, which I think is why the Safe House framework appealed to me, because I like the idea of bringing everyone together to talk about it. And I like it because you have a focus. It's because where do you start? You know what I mean? Like, how do you actually do this? How do you actually bring people together, and what do you talk about? What questions do you ask? So having a framework is really helpful from the perspective of, okay, well, here we've got something we can work to.
Yeah.
And then once you're established and the communication channels are open, well, then it can happen and you can work from there, I imagine. But this is quite rare for me. As I said, there's only been a few occasions really where I've had any kind of collaboration with the school, and I'm really willing to do it.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm not even looking to be paid to do it, because I think I really want this student to succeed. I really want them to achieve what they want to achieve. Mm-hmm. So with some students we set goals, but it just depends on the student and depends where they are at. Generally we already know the goal when they come in, because it's either to learn to read or do maths or learn to write. So we don't kind of set specific goals, by the end of this term I'm going to be able to read this thing, because I don't want to put that pressure on them. Like, we'll go at the pace that we go at. And I explain to the kids that this is just for them. There isn't a pressure. Doesn't matter how fast we go. I don't mind if we take a whole term just to understand one topic, because you've got it then.
Yeah.
And then next time you come to do it, particularly in maths, where students have a lot of anxiety around maths, you look at the school curriculum and, I look at what they would cover in a week, and I think just one of those things with some of my students would take a whole term. I mean, with one student, we spent an entire year on fractions. We didn't do anything but fractions for a whole year. But by the end of that year, she understood fractions, and she's really good at fractions now.
Yes.
And so then when the fractions comes around again the next year, there isn't the spike of anxiety and horror of, oh, no, I'm doing fractions, and that disengagement and so on, because we've kind of knocked that one on the head. Now she's happy with fractions. We're on to algebra.
Yes.
And if we spend the whole year on algebra, whatever it takes, now you've got that under your belt, because the good thing about maths is it's cyclical, so each year you kind of do the same things again.
Yes.
So it's more like that. It's more like I want to make sure I want to find out what's causing the issue and tackle it however long it takes.
Yeah,
because if they get that under their belt, they feel progress, they start to feel confidence.
Yes, and that is such an important role for kids. I see so many kids who there's one particular lady locally to me who sounds like you work in a very similar way to her. Her focus is primarily literacy, but the kids love her, and they light up when you mention her, and they just see her as, it's almost like an oasis in the desert. They spend all day at school going, oh God, I don't know what's going on, and then they'll go to her and they'll get something that makes sense. And there'll be kids that have gone from being just completely unable to read to really being able to just hold their own in a classroom. And that is, well, as we know, that's life-changing. That is absolutely life-changing. And I think it's the relationship that is really what's so powerful there, is having someone who just hangs in there with you for as long as it takes and doesn't get frustrated. And, if it's not working, change tact. And it's, priceless.
Yeah. And there's no way you could do that in a school. Because like I said, 1 week to cover a topic that might take me a year to cover. It's huge.
It is.
Conversation,
it is
isn't it? We can't kind of solve it in a minute. But what I love is the idea of a starting point, because I think when you're feeling lost, feeling anxious, whether this is a parent, a teacher, a student, a tutor, anyone kind of in the life of that student, if you're feeling in that space of, I don't know what to do next, having some kind of framework can be a saviour. And so just saying, okay, here's the next step I need to take, then I take this step, then we try this, then we try that. At least you're doing something and you feel like, okay, we're making progress. Even if something doesn't work, you're working towards success. I think that makes a very big difference to the whole motivation of everyone and the kind of atmosphere around the student, that we're working towards success, rather than always feeling like we're kind of treading water and having to manage behaviour and get them not to do this, or, how do I change that? It's quite a different mindset, isn't it? Which is where we first began talking about it today. That's one of the most difficult parts, is kind of changing that mindset and attitude from that medical, there's something wrong that I have to fix, to that more kind of inquisitive, diagnostic, what's going on here?
Yes.
What can we do to make the environment safe for the student?
And that's where I think the framework, even if people don't do the program, just working through that framework, which again, that's freely available on the website as well, of it's just the thought process to go through. It's sort of coming at it from a different angle, but that facilitates the mindset change as well, right? Because you pause and you go, okay, well, what assumptions am I making? What do I know about this child? What have I, who can I go to for support? Who can I ask questions about this? Am I viewing their behaviour as communication, and what is it communicating? Am I offering them a relationship that's free from judgment, criticism and rejection? And am I, upholding their rights? Am I advocating for them where I can? Am I ensuring that their basic needs are met? And does the community understand them? Because I think for a lot of kids that's also a real trigger is, they're activated by whatever they're activated by, but then they also know that their peers are kind of a little bit judgmental of them, and they're known as the problem child in the class or what have you. And so have the whole class had a discussion, and is there some sort of social and emotional lesson that is creating a safe environment with a shared mindset among the students? So mind you, that said, I think kids are pretty understanding. Kids are pretty accepting of each other in my experience. Hear them all the time talk about each other. He's got something.
Yeah,
he's got something. But it's not, it's not in a judgy kind of way. It's there's something going on with that one.
I mean, I do have students that feel isolated. I have had a few students that have said, I don't have any friends.
Yes.
And I get that information. I think, where do I go with that? You know what I mean? Because maybe they've only told me that. And yes, I can tell the parent, but, having a collaborative framework where I can say, hey, this is what's going on. This is why this student wasn't doing well today, because they don't feel like they've got any friends. What can we do? How can we address that as a team? That just makes so much sense, because many times I feel a bit helpless there, because I see them for an hour a week and, we're supposed to be talking about maths, but we're talking about, I don't have any friends, and, I'm not a psychologist or a counsellor. So it's kind of, it's really tricky, isn't it?
Yes. Well, you're probably in a friendly role, not a friend, but you're a friendly person. That's why they're sharing that with you. So don't underestimate the support that comes from that.
No, that's right. But I wish I had something to do with that. What can I do with that information? Where can I share that? And how can I collaborate with a team around this student to address that? Because that's a huge issue, isn't it? Like, if a student's saying, I have no friends, well,
it is common too.
It's common, but it's like, well, what's their school experience going to be like? How are they going to be learning maths if actually they're sitting there feeling so lonely and like, I don't have any friends? That's, you know what I mean? So this is what I like about the whole Safe House, the idea that it is about creating that nurturing and safe environment so that students can learn. So complicated, it needs a team.
It does. Yes. And then it's achievable, because it's, many hands make light work, many minds, it's exponential what you come up with when you get your heads together and brainstorm. So
I'm so glad to have met you face to face after seeing you in our course. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing your experience and your insights. I'm sure people will get a lot out of it. And as I mentioned before, I'll be putting that onto, all the notes on the website, the links to the resources that people can use, many of them free or no charge. If people don't have the money, parents, they can email you and ask.
Absolutely.
I love getting comments from people. So if people want to go to the website and make comments or ask questions about the episode, that would be excellent. You can follow us on Facebook. The website is discastia.com. Thank you so much, Valli. I could talk for hours more. It's so insightful and so I just think it's great. So thank you very much for giving us the time and sharing the insight. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope you got something out of it. As I said, please, I love getting comments, having conversations, so feel free to engage, and see you next time. Thank you, Valli.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.